Yes, I am a university professor, and this is not going forward, and therefore I write books. These are some of the books I have written. I like seeing my name in different print faces. They don't make me a lot of money. I wish they did, but I enjoy it nevertheless. I also go into the real world and do consulting. Do you see on the extreme left Goldman Sachs and The Economist? Well, between those two is my top client. I hope you recognize who that is. You shall be beheaded if you can't. Yes, it is rather small. It's the Queen of England and some more clients. So that's enough of showing off. Let me tell you what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to talk about virtual working, working in a different sort of an environment. I'm going to talk about one or two, I think, interesting psychological issues with regard to this particular form of behavior. I want to start off with the idea of that work is good for you. You know, the psychologists years ago started studying the unemployed. Why were the unemployed so unhappy? Because many of them indeed had reasonably good incomes of one sort or another, but they weren't very happy. What was it about work that was good for them? Why do we have occupational therapists? And what the psychologists discovered, that work is good for you. Work is a useful psychological, has useful psychological benefits. Well, why? Well, yes, it's a source of income. We know that money is important, blah, blah, blah. But it gives us something to do. It's a source of activity. Some of you might have discovered that from working from home. You've been stuck inside a lot. You've not got something to do. It structures your time. There's an issue here about starting at 9, ending at 5, and whether you and people working at home or virtual working have learned to structure their own time, to get into a schedule which is good for them. Morning people in the morning, evening people in the evening. You know, when it's like when you go on holiday, you're on the beach and you say, well, I rather fancy a pina colada, and your spouse says, your partner says, my God, it's only 9:10 in the morning, and you don't even know that. More than that, you have to go up to the bartender and ask what day of the week it is. I think work gives you a structure of time, and one of the things of virtual working is that you have to impose a structure, which is not bad. Work provides regular shared experiences. Still today, although of course we marry people who we meet on the web, still today we're more likely to marry a person we meet at work. This is a shared, we're social animals. Work is an important place for shared experiences. We must never forget that. That's what we miss. We miss the water cooler moment, shooting the breeze, talking to people in the kitchen, because we are social animals. And of course, virtual working doesn't offer it in the same way. Yes, it does, but not in the same way. Work is a source of personal status and identity. Who you are is what you do, particularly for men. Men say to each other, what do you do? That's what they want to know. They want to know where you are in the hierarchy. Now, virtual working, of course, is still working, but not quite the same. And work provides an experience of creativity, mastery, a sense of purpose. Some of us are lucky. We're knowledge workers. What we need is a laptop and we carry on. There are those who don't do it like that. And virtual working is not as possible. It restricts their abilities to show their creativity and mastery and purpose. So the question is basically the benefits of working. Well, working from home. You could say there's less commuting time, traffic congestion, pollution. Very noticeable in London. I was in Bond Street this morning. I'm in the city now. One can move around. But how much? I was talking to somebody in work. He spent 3.5 hours coming to work and going home in the evening. That's all gone if you work from home. A great flexibility and autonomy when you work, how you work, why you work in a particular place. This gives you a sense of control. You might not be as fortunate enough to have a spare bedroom and all the rest of it, but you can work when it suits you. Chronobiological. Early morning people can work early in the morning and take the afternoon off, whatever. There's a work-life balance issue for some. It can be seen as a benefit. A better talent pool and no relocating. You can get people to work anywhere around the world now if they're working virtually. This constitutes an interesting problem because of hiring people who are much cheaper, but that's another issue we'll have to worry about. And this is an important question I'm going to deal with, it's a distraction-free environment. Some people say in the workplace there's noise, there's people interrupting you the whole time. At home, in your bedroom, in your spare room, on the kitchen table or whatever, it's distraction free. Equally, of course, there are a number of issues of people saying there are disadvantages. What about the equipment and the bills and the breakdown? You know, who's providing you with the laptop? What about health and safety? Very interesting issue for HR people. What happens if you fall down the stairs while working at home in working time? Who is responsible for that? How come it's still a corporate culture? I was with my boss today, and he's very worried about 2 new people adopting our corporate culture. They're sitting at home. They've never been into the office. We have a very strong, a very powerful corporate culture. How can you do this? What about the learning opportunities? Or, sorry, how do you measure and control and monitor people? Very interesting problem for some organizations. I was talking to a friend of mine working in a big bank who shall have to remain nameless. And of course, how do you know people are working at home? How do you know they're sitting doing things at their computer? Well, if you can't measure the output, what are you going to measure? You're going to measure key depressions on the computer. That becomes an interesting issue about measuring performance. In the office, at least you can see they're there. Fewer learning opportunities, maybe. Communication problems. I'm going to talk about that. To what extent is this contacting you, talking to you on this particular medium? What problems does it bring about? There may be opportunities, there might be particular problems with this. And communicating with head office. Exclusion, poor promotion prospect. You get forgotten. If you're at work, people see you the whole time. But if you're sitting at home, wherever you're sitting at home, you're sort of not central anymore. You can be forgotten. Family, friends not respecting your work time space. People will often say this, you know, it's all very well, you people with your nice spare bedroom, but what about me at home with being interrupted the whole time? I don't have the advantages of a clean, quiet office of the one I'm sitting in at the moment. And we'll talk about the difference between electronic communication and face-to-face, which is an issue I'm particularly interested in. Well, here's a little game. Here are a number of activities, all right? Attend an in-house business meeting. I've done one of those today. Interview a potential job candidate. Negotiate with a client. Give a presentation, such as I'm doing now. Chair a business meeting. Shoot the breeze with some workmates. I and friends do zincs, which are Zoom drinks. We shoot the breeze after 5 o'clock with a drink in our hand. Fire or furlough a member of staff via this methodology. Do a staff appraisal. Interview a new and potentially very important client. Give a press interview. My question is, all of these activities are interesting and nearly all done face-to-face. Which constitutes the most problematic, not in general, but using this methodology? So if we're using this particular methodology of working at home and contacting each other via electronic media, which one presents more of a problem and why? I should talk a little bit about this in the time I have left. Well, the question, of course, is the benefits of office working, because that's the whole point. We're now no longer working in office. There are questions whether we'll ever all go back. I know some people want to go back 3 days a week. Some are desperate to go back 5 days a week. In my particular office at the moment, there's one person who has been in 5 days a week since it all began. He's ignored all the signs. Why do people like the office? Well, there's the chatting, the catching up, the bonding with the colleagues. I've said it before, we are social animals. We like the contact. It's important for us. There's the technical facilities. There's, you know, the photocopying and the printing. You've got a printer at home. I've got a printer at home. It chugs away to 20, 30 copies. I today photocopied 400 pages, not photocopied, I printed out 400 pages because the facilities in the office. There's a clear start and end to the day. One of my boss's PA said to me, I said, what do you like about working from home? She said various things, but she said, you know what? I like to know when the day is finished. I like to know, I go home and the day is finished. When you're working from home virtually, there's no end to the day unless you let people know that 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock or whatever is the end. She said, I don't like that. I like the demarcation, Being in the city centre, well, there are huge advantages for some people. You know, there's the shopping opportunities and whatever. Some would see it a disadvantage, others an advantage. Getting out of the house, men will say. I have one of my colleagues today said, I said, why do you come in so much, Steve? He said, I like to get out of the house. I didn't ask why he'd like to get out of the house, but people will say that, and dare I say this, maybe more men than women. Face-to-face meetings, the ability to focus, the ability to collaborate, the ability to re-energize, continuous learning. So there are reasons why people like to go to the office, to a place where we work together. It's often thought of as beneficial. Let me add a bit of psychology into all this. I want to look at 3 topics. The question is memory for communication. We remember more from emails and telephone calls than we do face-to-face communication. I want to say a little more about medium of communication and how this particular medium might or might not be beneficial. I then want to talk about webinar communication and how this can be done more effectively. I was saying to Chris earlier, I'm going to do a study on this form of communication, because you might, like me, watch the web, don't you? You watch the news and you see people being interviewed from home. And some of them understand this process much better than others. They understand the importance of lighting. They understand the importance of the background, but they also understand the importance of looking at the camera, and they understand the importance of being too close to the camera. It makes a difference in the way in which you are received. And of course, when people say to me, you know, I've got to do a webinar, I say, I'll tell you what you've got to do. You've got to mimic David Attenborough. You've got to be very not volatile, you've got to be very active, you've got to be very committed, you've got to vary your tone, you've got to vary your expressions. Because people are sitting there, it's a very cold medium. You can only, I'm a talking head. You can't see whether I'm wearing trousers. You can't see anything about my legs below the screenshot. Now this is useful information in many ways to understand the individual. So if you've only got a talking head, that talking head should be pretty active, should be very engaging and engrossing. And then I want to talk about some form of distractions. I'm going to talk a little bit about personality. We haven't got time to go into this in great detail. That's a very important slide. It's called the curvilinear slide, which explains the difference between introverts and extroverts. What is the major difference between introverts and extroverts? The answer is extroverts are under-stimulated, under-aroused, and therefore they seek stimulation from other people, whereas introverts are overstimulated, over-aroused, therefore they don't like distraction. So it becomes a very interesting question. I've recently published a study on this topic. You go into shops these days, have you noticed they're playing music? Why do they play music? Well, what they're interested in doing is they're trying to change your mood. They'll do so through music. They'll do so through scent, through smells. They'll do so by lighting. They try and change your mood because your mood changes your behavior. Now the question is, this was a study we did. It was a study on bankers making financial decisions. You're sitting at home. Some of you like music in the background. You like classical music, Radio 3 bubbling along quietly. You might like something more racy, more fast. The question is the distraction and what effect it has on your performance. Well, first of all, is music. Is it distracting? Well, there's fast music, slow music, instrumental, vocal, familiar, non-familiar. We know the most distracting music is loud, vocal, and familiar. You want to sing along, etc. Very distracting. Depends on what you're doing. What task are you doing? Are you doing something deeply involving? Sometimes you really got to concentrate. It's high processing information. And of course, the distraction then is a bad thing. When you're doing a boring task, you know, they had music while you worked during the war because it kept up people's mood while they did repetitive tasks. Most of us don't do repetitive tasks. We do involving tasks, cognitively complex tasks. And therefore, any form of distraction is bad. And then there's the sort of people. introverts and extroverts. So the worst possible combination is an introvert who is overstimulated and therefore gets more overstimulated by distraction, listening to loud, familiar music while doing a distraction, while doing a complex task. So the question for you is, setting up your home environment, your virtual working, do you want to lift your mood? How would you change your mood? How would you get a bit of energy? And what effect does this have on what distraction is beneficial and what not beneficial for your particular work? I think the memorability of communication. I'm very interested in this. It's a very important issue with advertising. How do you make communication more memorable, that it lasts? Telephone calls, emails, this type of communication. What we know is this. Effectively, we communicate through three methods: words, the newspaper; sounds, the radio; visual, face-to-face. So you can communicate on a telephone, you can communicate via email, or you can communicate through this medium. The question is, which will you remember most? Which is easiest to process? Now, what I've ensured is that you've got these slides. So these slides are for you. You may have them. You may use them afterwards as an aid memoir. But imagine we didn't have any slides and I was simply talking to you. How much of this recording would you remember? How easy is it to process? And there's some interesting facts going on here. And that is, you have three different mediums. You have print, audio, and audio visual. So you have, let me tell you a quick story. I used to do this with my students. It was the first seminar, first block practical it was called, they ever did. One group went into a room and they read a report in 3 minutes and 20 seconds. Another group went into a room and they listened to a broadcast of that report. And the third group went and watched the television. So we degraded. So we had a television report, 3 minutes, 20 seconds. Some watched it, some heard it, some read it. Who remembered most? I said, put up your hands. Oh, they said, television remembered most. They always remember least, not most, least. The ones who read it remember most. Why is this interesting? Well, it's interesting for the way in which we communicate and we work at home. When should you send somebody an email? When should you Zoom them? When should you phone them? For the, not because it's easy, because you like doing it, but the effectiveness of the communication. You see, the thing about reading is that it takes more effort. You come home at night at 6 o'clock, you put on the news, you pour a glass of wine and it washes over you. It's more difficult reading. The processing, the effort involved means it sticks. Because also with reading, you can do it at your pace. For some of you who are listening in a second or even a third language, I might be speaking too fast. You would slow it down. When it's you are processing it, do it at your speed. Often with pictures, there's an asynchronicity between the script and the picture. There's the picture and there's what people are saying. This is particularly true on television, and the one might put you off. And there's paragraphing and chunking, which you do when you read material. So the question is this: remote working means we communicate with each other, not face-to-face, but electronically. And we can do so on the telephone, which is vocal and verbal. We can do so via this method, which is vocal, verbal, and visual, or we can do so by email, which is verbal. The really skillful person, I think, makes choices, thinks about which one is best for the particular type of information that you're trying to pass to people. If I want people to, if I'm sending something which I think is subtle or complicated, I will send an email. I might send an email after I've seen them face to face. But what I'm trying to ensure is that the subtlety of the message is well processed and remembered. So when we're working virtually, we have different opportunities to use different media. And I think a skillful person will make those sort of choices. So here's some healthy video conferencing tips. Now, you say, well, you know, physician, heal thyself. I'm not sure if I've done them all very well today. But to improve your image and carefully design your presentation, presentation, make sure of the background. Now, this background might not be very good. We were fiddling around with it earlier. And I'm fascinated, you know, if you get bored with me, you look in the background or you look at Chris and you think, what's going on there? Why have they got these daft things in the background? Do you think they really are those books that people read? You get distracted by the background. Now, I think what you need to do is you need to make sure that the background doesn't distract them too much. I think with all virtual meetings, you should follow them up with an email summarizing and essential takeaways. I say to people when teaching them about, for instance, appraisals, you know, one of the most important things with any appraisal is for a summary to be done at the end of the appraisal, and that's done by the appraisee. I teach medical students. Doctors are taught to say to their patients after they have had the consultation, now can you just summarize what I've said to you? Because they've listened, they've been nervous, they've been anxious, they've heard certain things, they haven't heard certain others. I've never, ever seen a consultation end at that point because the patient hasn't heard what the doctor said. The lecturer, the person, the appraiser has not, the appraisee, I beg your pardon, has not always heard what the appraiser said. Follow up all these sort of meetings with a quick summary of what you heard. Get people to do that. Get them into the habit of what was the takeaway, what was agreed. A two-lined email following a Zoom presentation, I think, is very useful. Third, try in a meeting not to have too many people. This is obviously not a meeting, but if there is a meeting, psychologists say 7 plus or minus 2, otherwise it breaks up into multiple meetings. That is the general rule for teams and for groups, and might equally be important with regard to the size of boards. Fourth, if you do power presentation and figures and stuff, make it pretty simple. I've not been a good example of that necessarily. And fifth, get into a healthy routine about when and why you host a virtual meeting. Start by noting what went well and what didn't. In other words, learn from one's experiences.
At this point, I'm going to introduce Liz. Liz and I have worked together for something like 25 years. Liz leads our coaching practice at Leadenhall Consulting, and she's going to talk through the results of our survey. I'm actually going to go behind the scenes and admit any people who are stragglers. I'm also going to help facilitate breaking out rooms later. So I'm going to disappear from view, and you're going to have a chance to hear from Liz.
Great, thanks very much. So it's great to be here, and actually what I realise in listening to what Adrian has got to say is there's quite a lot of information that's come out of the survey that we've done, which is in line with what Adrian has already told us. So many of you will have kindly completed our survey, but perhaps not everybody. So we decided in preparation for this webinar, it would be really interesting to hear from people their own experience of being working virtually, remotely, mostly from home. So we sent out a questionnaire, and we had 73 people completed the survey to date. Well, actually, we've had a few more since we cut the data on Friday, and we're going to keep it open, and we're going to keep gathering the data. And then we were thinking perhaps we might carry on and do it again in 6 months' time, because we've been experiencing this new way of working for 6 months. And I think we're all still learning and getting our heads around it. So it'd be really interesting to see if people's views change in a year or 2 years' time. As part of the survey, we used some demographic questions at the beginning to see whether it made a difference in people's responses. So for example, if you were a team leader versus a team member, did it change your responses? Did it matter what size of team you work in or lead? Did it matter what type of team? Are you in a leadership team? Are you a functional team? Did it matter the geographic span? Did it matter the number of time zones? And actually what we discovered, which I hadn't anticipated, is that it really didn't make any difference how you answered those demographic type questions as to how the data looked. So one of our favorite models that we use when we're working with teams is the 5 dysfunctions, or the Lencioni 5 behaviors model. Some of you will be familiar with this model, some and others won't, but it's simple but really effective. And actually we used this model partially in constructing the questions for the survey. So this model says actually that trust is the foundation of effective team working, whether that's virtual or face-to-face. And if people trust each other and are prepared to admit their vulnerabilities and be honest about themselves, then it's much easier for a team to engage in constructive conflict. So have the difficult conversations, have robust discussions, that kind of thing. And if they're able to do that, then they're much more likely to be committed to the decisions that are made and the things that they've decided to do in their goals. And if you're more likely to be committed as a team, you're much more likely to be comfortable to hold each other accountable. So you might say, well, you said that you were going to do that take that particular action, and I don't think you've done it yet. So how's that going? And team members are much more likely to hold each other accountable and not expect only the team leader to be the person that holds team members accountable. And if you can do all of that, then you're much more likely to focus on the team results. People are much less likely to be worried about their own profile in the team, whether they are achieving their own career aspirations. They're much more likely to focus on the team's results. So we use that, as I say, we use that model in constructing the questions. And I'm going to take you through some of the results. So the first thing that we noticed is actually, in terms of the 73 people who responded to the survey, that actually the vast majority are in one country working in one time zone. So 75%, and about a quarter of that population are working in more than one country, a small number of countries, and a small number of time zones. So that's the context in which people responded to the questions. Again, we asked, well, what was the way that you were working before the pandemic? And actually what we discovered, which this surprised me again, is that half of the people had been working in a team which was pretty much face-to-face all the time, and on the odd occasion having virtual meetings. And then the other big group, about 40%, were having a bit of a mix. So quite a lot of face-to-face with some virtual meetings, or meetings where some of the team would dial in. So actually what it's telling us is that for half of these people, moving to everybody working from home, or the majority working from home, is a big difference in the way that they were working before the pandemic. So we asked quite a lot of questions. It took about 10 minutes of most people to fill in the survey. And I'm going to just quickly take you through the questions where actually the responses were split fairly evenly across people who either would strongly disagree, neither agree nor disagree, agree or strongly agree. So there was sort of almost a 30-30-30 distribution of the results, which again, in the way that we crafted the questions, it was partly based on our own hypotheses as to what we expected might be the responses. And these results actually have challenged our expectations and our own thinking. So for example, our virtual meetings are more transactional and less strategic than our face-to-face meetings. There was a fairly even split. So for some people that was true, for some people that's not true, and for others actually it was no different than it had been pre-pandemic. We thought that working virtually would make it more difficult for people to be creative and innovative. That didn't seem to be the case. Some people said our previous team meetings were more creative and innovative. Some people said it's not really any different, and other people said, well, no, I don't agree with that statement. We thought it would be easier for people to speak up, similar to the question that was asked of Adrian earlier. We thought it'd be easier for people to speak up, but again, people were pretty divided and said, well, for some it was easier, for some it was harder, and for others, well, not really any different. We're less likely to deal with difficult issues. Again, that was a sort of a split view. We thought it would be more difficult for people to have the difficult conversations, talk about sensitive topics, but that wasn't a conclusive result. There's less open discussion, conflict and disagreement. Again, a split view. Outside of team meetings, is it more or less difficult for people to collaborate? Another question where the results are, well, some people found it more difficult, some people found it actually easier, other people not really any different. It's been more difficult to build and maintain relationships. So some people have found it's okay, other people have found it more of a challenge. Collaboration, not really a conclusive result on that. So my view was that actually people would find it more difficult to collaborate virtually, not having those chatting, informal chats where you're getting a cup of tea and that kind of thing. But that doesn't seem to be something that people are in agreement on. And whether they can contribute to the team and how isolated they feel. Again, a fairly sort of even split between the agrees, the disagrees, and the, well, actually it's kind of the same. So now I'm going to move on to where we did have a more of a majority view on various questions. And actually the Zoom menu is hiding the questions, so you'll have to forgive me. I'm going to refer to my slides here. So here we do have a conclusive view. Our face-to-face meetings were more focused and less likely to waste time than our virtual team meetings. Actually, the vast majority of people said, I disagree with that statement. That is not the case. Our team is achieving its results just as effectively since the move to home-based virtual team working. So really good news, actually, that the vast majority of people feel that the team is effective. And whilst 50% of these people have gone from working face-to-face most of the time to working virtually, it hasn't had the impact on their effectiveness as a team as we had probably anticipated. Right, so let's not get in the muddle. So there is less trust between team members since we began working as a virtual team. So was that 55, 65, 60, probably 67 people said, actually, I disagree with that statement. So it seems like certainly for teams that were established and people were used to working with each other, even though they were working remotely with each other, they still trusted each other. I think that's more difficult from anecdotally what we hear from people. It's more difficult to build trust and relationships when you're new to a team or to an organization. These, as you can see, are the Lencioni related questions. So I feel less committed to my team. Well, actually, no, I don't. Most people said, I feel just as committed as I did before. Again, very good news, I would suggest, for teams and effective team working. My work-life balance is better. So there's quite a lot of agreement around that. So it's been really good for people. You'll see later that actually people have found that there's a blurring, as Adrian mentioned, there's a blurring between work and life, and people have found that difficult, but overall the balance has been better. People feel less stressed. Actually, yes, they do feel a little bit. At least half the people feel a little bit less stressed by this way of working. I thought this was really nice, this response. I miss working in the same office as my colleagues. Well, actually, yes.
We don't. We're together.
We do. We miss working with our colleagues, and we're going to look at this a little bit more. That the social connection is really, really critical to people's sense of satisfaction, engagement, etc. I would prefer to go back to how the team operated prior to the pandemic. No, not really. And the most conclusive response of all of the questions was, looking to the future, our team is likely to find a new way of working as a team. So, I mean, that's very stark, isn't it? That I think it's telling us that things have changed forever, really, and we're not going to go back. So those are the results of our survey, which I hope you found interesting and informative. But we didn't just rely on the survey data. We also wanted to do some reading, and as Adrian mentioned, there's a lot of research going on at the moment around this virtual working topic. So these are some examples of the articles and research that we have been looking into in preparation, and we can share these slides, and so if you want to read some of these articles, then we can provide you with the detail, because they're very interesting. But the key findings, and I apologise for the fact there's a lot of words on this slide, but the key findings are that basically at times like this, when there's a massive acceleration in a shift in the way that we're working, people can change really quickly. So if we'd have said 7-8 months ago, what's the likelihood that you could get the majority of people, particularly in sort of financial services type organisations, to be all working from home, I think we would not have been able to predict the current situation. So things can change very quickly. Individual productivity has perhaps not been impacted by people moving from working in the office to working from home. But when it comes to working collaboratively with colleagues, the research that we have looked into says actually that is impacted by a lot of remote and virtual working. Work-life, as I mentioned already, work-life boundaries have become more blurred, but for some people that's actually been an advantage because they can do some of the things that are more about their family and their home life during the day than they would be able to if they were in the office. So that has been a good thing. Managers have taken the brunt of moving to remote kind of 100% remote working, and Microsoft they did an analysis using, because all of the people that work for Microsoft are on their systems, they actually did data analytics to understand the changes in people's work patterns. And one thing that was happening is that managers were doing a lot more one-to-ones. Flexibility is something that people are really looking for now. So whether that's in how they get their work done, where they get their work done, in terms of, is it at home, is it in the office, that the attitudes to flexibility have changed a lot. And basically the future of work is going to be increasingly hybrid. So I found this really interesting when I started looking into the topic, but there's a woman called Karen Sobel-Lejeski who has been working on this idea of virtual distance, as she labelled it, since before 2008. The first book she wrote on the subject after lots of research was in 2008, so way before the current situation. And what she said is that virtual distance can be made up of three things, and I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but I think it's very interesting. So it can be physical distance, which is what we're all experiencing in working from home. And I think we all understand physical distance from each other, we're not together, but also operational distance. So it's the things around how do we get the job done on a day-to-day basis if there's a big difference between people in terms of that activity, it causes problems. And then affinity distance, which is much more the human element of feeling distant from each other. And that could be cultural, which could be we come from completely different cultures in terms of where we live and grew up in the world. It can be the nature of our relationships and the hierarchy in an organization, that kind of relationship distance. It can be social, so we don't have the opportunity to socialize with each other in the way that we did. And basically what Karen said is you can measure these things. She created an index, a virtual distance index. You can measure these things, and if you can measure them, you can manage them. And whilst a greater virtual distance does have an impact on things like trust and collaboration, innovation, creativity, if you understand where those gaps are, you can do things, practical things, to reduce those gaps. And therefore the impact on the things that are more difficult is reduced. And she said that affinity distance, so the human element to working together, is a really key way where you can reduce that distance and make it easier for people to work together. So what we thought might be really helpful is to provide some practical, sort of short-term practical solutions for overcoming some of the things that we've all experienced in working in a much more virtual kind of environment. So You can see them here, and you don't need to make notes because we will circulate the slides afterwards. But I won't read them all out, but it's things like the fact that understanding that there is this thing called virtual distance and discussing it in a team and then figuring out what to do about it. I've called it adopting protocols for getting work done and communicating. You can remove some of the distance that's created by the way that we need to work. So for example, managers checking in with people rather than checking up on people, and assigning buddies and peer coaches to provide an extra level of support and the kind of social connection that people are really missing. Which ones shall I select from this? I like this idea. So promoting social connectivity by doing things where you're not talking about work. So in a team, you might have a happy hour where you all sit and have a cup of tea or something a bit stronger. Or you could even have a cook along. Somebody could do a cooking demonstration. Or one suggestion was a sort of meet my pet. I don't have a pet. I don't have a pet, so I'm not sure what I do really, but I might be able to meet other people's pets. And I really like the idea of Recharge Friday, so a day free of meetings as a bit of an antidote to the fact that we have this sort of always on way of working these days. Maybe something promoting physical health, which is either a team-wide or even a company-wide challenge. It might be let's all walk 5 kilometers between today and tomorrow, or anything. I'm sure other people can come up with something much more creative than that. But also adopting inclusive practices. So one thing is, if there is a meeting and you have got a mix of introverts and extroverts, the chair of the meeting can do what I call air traffic control, which is make sure that everybody has an opportunity to speak, and the person with the loudest voice is not the person who dominates the meeting, and that kind of thing. So create more inclusivity. So coming back round to the Lencioni model, how did we do? So looking at the survey results, actually what the survey told us is that trust is being maintained, which is really good. In terms of conflict, having the difficult discussions, though it was not really conclusive. So some are finding that's just as good as it ever was. Other people saying, actually, that's something we're struggling to do. People are still committed. That's really fantastic, excellent news. Team members are still being held to account, and teams are achieving results just as effectively. So that's the survey results on the research that we've looked into, and hopefully some practical, as I say, solutions and suggestions for how you can mitigate some of the things that happen as a result of virtual working.
What I thought I would say is, if we step back from all that's been said today, both from the survey, from the research, from Adrian's comments, clearly, and particularly, as we look at a second wave, COVID is obviously accelerating changes that were already happening in society. People are not going to be tied to 1 hour from the office. I think people will start looking at other places to live. There's going to be a wider talent pool available. People who you wouldn't have considered for a job because they wouldn't have considered themselves for a job will now be accessible. I think this is an interesting one. We've done some work on the gender pay gap, and one of the core pieces of information that has come out of the research into the gender pay gap is that it is in some ways a parent pay gap. The gap actually starts for people in the early 30s. In fact, in the UK, the gender pay gap is slightly in favour of women until the early 30s. Now, if we are going to be working from home and working virtually, 2 things can happen. One is that more people can continue their careers. And if females at the moment are primarily taking gaps or taking on more domestic responsibility, if they become parents, then they may be able to continue their career more effectively. And the men who may not be shouldering any more responsibility domestically or might be sticking to the workplace may have more flexibility to be able to help on the domestic front. So this is more of an observation. We may be seeing through virtual working the opportunity and flexible working, the opportunity to reduce the gender pay gap and also enable people's careers to be freed up more. There's going to be more focus on output, not presenteeism, maybe less hierarchy, maybe better home lives. I know we talk about mental health, isolation and stresses. For some people, this environment, this will be true, particularly financial stress. But there may be actually on the other side of this, an opportunity to have better balanced lives. The thing we need to bear in mind finally is that competition will be even more global. Industries are being reshaped, the recession is coming. Isolation may increase, and city centres, this could be very bad news for. And it's probably great news for Amazon, which is what I'm finding at the moment as I hear the delivery bell going every hour when I'm at home. So the world is changing rapidly. In terms of HR, you know, we've got to, we as a function, and I say this as a former HR professional, we're going to, this is going to be on the agenda for the future. There's a new working ecosystem. There'll be new skills that will be required. Leaders are going to have to lead in a different way. Individuals and professionals are going to have to learn new skills on influencing. And so this is about how do we work out what the new environment is, and then how do we prepare the workforce and ourselves for operating in that new environment as it emerges.